Hi guys, it's me again. Yeah, funny. Alright, so I want to talk about a very interesting phenomenon on several levels in psychology. And again, we're in Module 1, and this is an extension of what we've been looking at in thinking and reasoning, but I want to talk specifically about intelligence. The book doesn't go as deeply into this as I like to, and that's where the book and I can kind of complement each other, and this of course will be tied to an assignment once again. So we're picking up on this idea of theory, but in this case intelligence, I think it's a fascinating idea where measurement preceded theory. So we were measuring intelligence long before we actually even discussed what it was. It was a very purposeful system, so we're going to trace the history of this and then bring it up to our assignment level. So how is intelligence measured? Well, intelligence testing has a history of controversy, and still does, right? But most psychologists now view intelligence as a normally distributed trait, and we're going to tell you what that means. Most of you probably already know. And it can be measured by performance on a variety of tasks. Now, historically, when we look at intelligence, different cultures have conceptualized and measured intelligence differently. The Chinese have probably been measuring intelligence longer than anybody else on the planet. You know, we have ancient cultures in China. The Chinese have been measuring maybe for 4,000 years, and basically they were kind of a civil service type paradigm. They wanted to make sure that people were qualified for the jobs that they might hold. So if we go back 4,000 years and you wanted to apply for work, civil service positions, right, then they might want to know, well, so you want to work in the law. What do you need to know? What do you know about the law? And then they would measure your ability in the law before you could get a job in the law. The military, so what about tactics or leadership, these kinds of things. Agriculture, obviously tremendously important, so if you want to work in that field, what do you know? And geography. And notice these are very purpose-built measures. That is, we're going to have people working in this area. What is their ability to perform in these areas? So these are ability-based, knowledge-based measures. Now contrast this with the Western culture, and we see often examples in Western culture, especially the United States, of this idea of native intelligence. Either you got it or you don't. And it's kind of a birthright, right? I was born with a science gene, right? So I know science. And that's a different kind of conceptualization, right? So they measure native ability or demonstrable ability, but not necessarily learning ability or potential, and that's a big difference. So we'll think about this as we move through this. The definition of intelligence is still disputed, and that makes it difficult. That's why it's so darn controversial. Now, where did it all come from in Western society? The actual intelligence test, the IQ test that we maybe are thinking about. Alfred Binet, 1857, 1911, what's Binet's issue? Well, he developed the compulsory, the test that would assess people for their ability to enter into the educational system. So France, what are we talking about? 1905 says, look, all children have to go to school. And it's like, well, didn't they have to anyway? And no, back in the day, if you were wealthy, you went to school, but if you were poor, you probably got minimal education, if any. And let's face it, if we go back, 200 years, you were probably going to do what your parents did. If your father was a shoemaker, then it was likely that you would be a shoemaker. If your father was a farmer, so your education would be dependent basically on what it is you were going to do, and education was narrowly geared toward that future, and much of the education might have taken place at home or in the workshop or out in the fields because it was very narrowly defined. But when France says all children are going to go to school, can you imagine that first year that you have all these children, many who've never been in school before, and of all different ages? What grades do you put them in? What classes do you give them? And so Binet said this is a real problem, and we have to identify where children belong. So it was a performance-based measure. That is, it was based on what someone could do at that point in time to assess the abilities they needed to succeed in school. Now, Binet was part of Binet's thinking was that intelligence is not fixed. It can be nurtured. It can be improved. And we'll see that that is a controversial idea even to this day. He was the first to calculate a child's mental age, and what he does is he's got his tests, and based on your score, it says, well, then you function at the level of the average 6-year-old, or you function at the level of the average 8-year-old. So this idea of mental age was an average performance observed of children of a given age. Now, here's one of Benet's big concerns is some children might be behind, and we need to identify the children who are 2 years behind or more and get them help, get them tutoring, get them remedial help to bring them up to their age level so that they can succeed in school. Well, okay, so the French start, Benet starts, but then, you know, the United States and many other countries across the world are looking at what France is doing and they go, hey, this is pretty cool, I think we'll do it too. So Louis Terman is the man who brought it to us in the United States for the most part. He adapted the Benet test for Americans. Hi, Lexi. I'll take a break here. This is Lexi. I've never seen Lexi up here during a video. Lexi was my mom's cat. She's, I don't know, 12, 13 years old. She had lived with my mom all her life. She was adopted as a youngster, and when my mom passed away, my wife and I assured my mom that we would take care of Lexi. So my mom passed away last November after a long, long bout with Alzheimer's, and so Lexi is with us now. And Lexi came from being a spoiled only cat to being a cat of, well, a cat of a large cat household, and she's adjusted splendidly. So here's Lexi. Hi, Lexi. I'm happy to see her up here. So what did Terman do? He adapted the Stanford Benet test for Americans, and he said, you know, but the deal is, my God, we can not only test children, we could test adults too, right? And he refined the concept of the intelligence quotient, defined as take a person's mental age, and that's the score they receive on the test, and then look at the person's actual age, their chronicle age, do the math, multiply that by 100. So let's say that the person scores like the average 10-year-old, but they're only 8 years old, right? And then we do the math, so the ratio of 10 over 8 and then times 100 equals 125. And if 100 is the average score on an IQ test, then what we're saying is someone who's 8 but performs like a 10 has a higher IQ. They're advanced beyond their chronological years. So they have an IQ of 125. Now this works the other way too. Suppose then that you score like a 6-year-old, but you're actually an 8-year-old, then in fact do the math, this is an IQ of 75. And what this is indicating then is special classes, special needs at this point in time. So we're off and running. Terman has made his modifications to the test, and now we're going to test adults. To what purpose? Are you going to eat the TV, sweetie? All right, so the Stanford Benet test is the one used by most Americans, and they said, wow, check it out. We can test Army recruits, and World War I is on the horizon. Remember, World War I started in 1914 for the United States. We entered in 1917, and can you imagine, we don't have much of an army, and now you got to build an army, and you got to build an army like in no time at all, and who do you put in what position? That's kind of like Benet's challenge with who do you put in what class, but the idea is who is going to be the infantryman, and they hand them a rifle and shovel and say best of luck, and that's the people who scored lower. Who are we going to train to be officers? Those people who score higher on the test. And the Army is now, the military is one of the leaders in the United States of testing. They devised all kinds of tests, and they're masters of the test, and they test people's qualifications all the time to determine where they should be placed, right? So, immigrants, and this is a dark story of the United States. That is, you would come, let's say you wanted to become an immigrant, right? My father's side of the family was Italians. They came anywhere from about 1895 to 1905. And you get to the processing point, and they give you an intelligence test, and if you score low, and the actual terms for scoring very low, depending on the score, were imbecile, idiot, and moron. No shit. Those were the actual terms that were applied to people who scored low. Then you were put on a boat and sent back because they said, we don't want you. You're going to be a drag on the economy. You have nothing to contribute. The United States has a dark history of treating immigrants very poorly, and so we tested immigrants. Right? It tested school children, and that was the original purpose. So, sample skills tested, and you'll have these slides available to you, so you might want to take a look at this. But I remember when I was 8 years old, my mom moved us from Burbank, California to Van Nuys, California, and it made me change from Burbank schools to Los Angeles City schools, and they tested me. They gave me an IQ test. I remember going into an office and sitting across the desk from a woman who spent about a half hour testing me, and I did actually some of these tests here, right? And so she would show me pictures, show me pictures, and I just tell her what the picture was, and then she would speak a 15-word sentence and ask me to repeat the 15-word sentence. So part of IQ test is also memory in this. They might show you two different objects, like a curling iron and a clothing iron, and say, what's the difference between these? All right? They might give you a rhyming word, and they say, so what's a rhyme for anticipate? And you might go through a list of those, and you're being scored on your ability to develop rhyming words. Most of these tests, though, are timed, so not only is it necessarily how correctly you answer the questions, but do you do it in the time allotted? And we'll get to that in a little bit. Define abstract concepts such as friendship. And abstract concepts come to us according to Jean Piaget, who looked at cognitive development in children. Anywhere from 11 to 13 years old, we begin to be able to process abstractions, concepts like love, friendship, etc. Before that, we're in a concrete stage where we maybe can't do conceptual thinking. And it goes under various revisions. So the individual tests like the Stanford Binet, the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Test and Wechsler tests are still around. Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children. So notice they're adapting the test to different groups, right? And groups becomes an important word here. It could take a long time to sit someone down, right, and imagine going to school and having to test everyone individually, one-on-one, right, over an hour period of time. It can take forever. So they develop what are paper and pencil tests. And now we can shove 300 people into a room, give them each a paper and pencil test, and we can test 300 people in the period of an hour rather than one at a time. Okay, so this enables widespread use, but then maybe, you know, it opens up the potential for abuse. That is, I come in to take the IQ test as an individual, and I sit across from the woman. She said, you get enough sleep last night? Everything okay at home? Did you get a good meal? Right? She can see if I'm actually prepared to take the test, I'm at my peak. Whereas if you just shove a bunch of people into a room, hand out tests, there may be some people who are kind of off their game that day and probably shouldn't be taking the test. Especially if this number that's attached to them, their IQ score, follows them through life, limits the classes, right, that they can take, or their promotion abilities in a military setting. This is an important number, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. I recommend against students taking, you know, any myriad of online intelligence tests because they tend to take them casually and they might produce a number that doesn't reflect someone's true potential. So if you want to be tested, I would go to a legitimate testing environment and a legitimately administered test, someone who does this professionally, so that you get an accurate score. Academic settings use these tests, right? And you know, variations like the GRE, LSAT, MCAT are kind of variations on this. They can be used in employment settings. Note that the police departments will rarely hire anyone who scores over 120 because they feel if someone's too smart, they don't make a good police officer because they become bored with their work. And that's been pushed all the way through the courts, and police department can legitimately disqualify you as a candidate for scoring too highly on an intelligence test. These tests are typically less accurate, but that being said, I've had 3 IQ tests over my lifetime, one when I was 8, one when I was 15, and one when I was 30, and the scores were within 3 points of each other, which is amazing reliability, considering 3 different ages and 3 different tests. But they're still typically less accurate. And then you can look at these two, and you can, these are some of the other types of tests, like here's a watch, what's missing on it. take these 4 pictures and arrange them in story order. So I'll let you guys, you know, have fun with that. This would be stuff that would be done more in-person tests. Paper and pencil tests. Let's give an example. Vocabulary. Vocabulary is a big deal. If you're going to study for the GRE, the MCAT, whatever it is, the LSAT, brush up on your vocabulary. I studied the 5,000 word list, right, before I took the GRE. The 5,000 word list to build your vocabulary. So, for example, vocabulary, viable. What is it most similar to? Traveled, capable of living, V-shaped, can be bent. And of course, you know, you can see how those might work out. Analogies, everyone's favorite. Washington is to Lincoln as July is to, and then you have to pick from January, April, May, October. I'm not going to, you guys do these on your own. You got it available to you. But everyone's favorites here, right? So, problems with the IQ test, what do we know? One thing, and this is kind of tongue-in-cheek, what do we find? As you get older, we kind of get pretty stupid. And notice, if we do the math here, let's suppose someone scores as a 15-year-old, that is, their mental age is 15, but their chronological age is 30, times 100, IQ of 50, which would certainly be mentally impaired. But suppose this person doesn't learn anything new, and when they're 60, they generate the same score. Then times 100, the IQ is 25. This person's getting really, really dumb. So they norm IQ scores according to the age group, right? So we don't get this kind of problem. And IQ tests are calculated on the curve through the normal distribution, a bell-shaped curve that shows the characteristic spread through a population. And the normal range is the scores that fall within the middle 2/3. But let's take a look at the picture, and this maybe makes it a little easier to understand. So the IQ test is developed. They norm the test, so no matter the difficulty of the test, the average score is normed to be 100. And what we see then is for every 15 points represents 1 standard deviation. So what's considered normal is people who are 1 standard deviation above average or 1 standard deviation below average. Gotta love your statistics, right? So normal is considered anyone who scores between 85 and 115. Right? And that's, you can see, 68% of any given population that takes this test, when it's normed properly, right, 2/3 of the people will score in that range, and that's what that we would call average at that point. Now, below average then is 2 standard deviations of below. That's another 15 points below, and about 14% of a population will fall in that area. And the same here, then these are the people who are more intelligent, 115 to 130. The cutoffs then that become more meaningful as far as providing extra help or context is people who score 3 standard deviations out or more, and that would be below 70 or people who are mentally challenged, right? And people then who score above 130 are gifted, right? This is profoundly probably retarded down here at 55, and then 145 is thought to, people argue about the specific number, but entry into genius level, if you will. Okay. Now you take someone like Einstein, was thought to have scored maybe at about 180, right? And I swear to God, my 2 advisors at Ohio State, my first advisor, Dr. Tetlock, for 3 years, and then he went off to Berkeley, and then Marilyn Brewer took me on after that. A brilliant person, right? Oh, those guys are scoring out here somewhere. You know, they're just incredibly intelligent, and this is the story of measuring IQs, and that's where I wanted to get us to at this point. The interesting thing, though, is what is intelligence? And no one has told us what intelligence is, and it's an old, crappy psychological joke, and psychologists don't tell very good jokes, so it's a crappy joke. They said, what does an intelligence measure? And it's like whatever it was designed to measure. Are you guys like rolling on the floor laughing now? I know it's not funny, but it's true that no one had really conceptualized intelligence. They developed a test to measure performance, and they can measure the performance on these questions. But does this test represent intelligence? And no one has told us what intelligence is yet. Is it intelligence a native ability? Is it something that can be nurtured or fostered? Is it akin to problem solving? What exactly is it? Is it just recognizing words? What is intelligence? And so now we have to kind of step backwards, now that we've been measuring intelligence for 40 or 50 years, and start thinking about what it actually is. And that's why I find this so damn ironic, that we put all this importance into intelligence and no one had really kind of devoted themselves to intelligence theory, simply the measurement, developing tests that give scores, and those scores we're going to call representative of intelligence. And part of your assignment is going to be to think about, what do you believe is intelligence? So now we get to the theoreticians and they say, well, right off the bat, is intelligence one factor, or is it two factors, or God forbid, is it multiple factors? And some psychologists, right, believe that the essence of intelligence is a single general factor. And way back in the day, one of the things they measured as intelligence was reaction time. And they figured if you had a faster reaction time, that indicated your brain was faster and that you were more intelligent. This is a very kind of ancient idea in the United States, that speed equals smart. So the quicker you come up with an answer, the smarter you are. Now, notice we'll talk about discrepancies there, or differences of opinion. So let's talk about some of the folks. Spearman, and Spearman's R, correlational statistic, right, that we're talking, that's Spearman. Now we got some super duper statisticians jumping into the game. He liked Binet's method of testing, and he developed factor analysis, so you could look at how people scored on each of the questions, and you could correlate scores for each question to each other, and this makes massive correlation matrices, right? And you can take classes in factor analysis. I had a class in factor analysis, one of the hardest classes I ever took, and a useful class when I was in graduate school. I struggled so much with that